The morning sun cast long shadows across the police academy training facility as Maya Chen stepped out of her beat-up Honda Civic. At 5'4" and weighing barely 120 pounds, she looked more like a college student than someone about to begin one of the most demanding law enforcement programs in the state. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard-issued gray training uniform that seemed to swallow her small frame. Maya took a deep breath and shouldered her gym bag. Today marked the beginning of her lifelong dream to become a police officer, but she knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. The academy had a reputation for being brutal, with a dropout rate hovering around 40%. What worried her more than the physical demands, however, was the attitude she had already encountered during the application process. "Look what the wind blew in," came a voice from behind her. Maya turned to see three large men approaching, all wearing the same gray uniforms but filling them out considerably better than she did. The one who had spoken was easily 6'3" with the build of a former college football player. His name tag read Johnson. "You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart?" Johnson continued, his two companions snickering behind him. "The community college is about 10 miles down the road." Maya felt her cheeks burn but kept her voice steady. "I'm exactly where I need to be." "Right," said the second man, whose name tag identified him as Rodriguez. "This ought to be entertaining. How long you think she'll last, Johnson? I give her 2 weeks tops." The third man, Peterson, shook his head with mock sympathy. 2 weeks? That's generous. I say she's crying in her car by lunch on day 3. Maya said nothing and walked past them toward the main building. Behind her, she could hear their laughter mixing with crude comments about her appearance and speculation about why she was really there. She had heard it all before during her college years, when she had studied criminal justice while working nights at a security company to pay her bills. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy as 32 recruits gathered in the main classroom. Maya found a seat near the back and surveyed her classmates. She was one of only 4 women in the group, and by far the smallest person in the room. Most of the men looked like they had stepped out of a fitness magazine, with broad shoulders and confident postures that spoke of athletic backgrounds. Instructor Williams entered the room with the bearing of a career military officer. His gray hair was cut in a precise flat top, and his uniform was pressed to razor-sharp creases. The room fell silent as his steely gaze swept across the recruits. "Welcome to hell," Williams said without preamble. "For the next 24 weeks your lives belong to me and my staff. Some of you think you know what you're getting into. You're wrong. Some of you think your college degree or your daddy's connections will help you here. They won't. Some of you think this is going to be like the movies. It isn't." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Look around you. Statistically, 12 to 15 of you won't be here at graduation. The academy doesn't care about your feelings, your excuses, or your personal problems. It cares about one thing: can you do the job when lives are on the line?" Maya felt a chill run down her spine, but also a surge of determination. She had not come this far to give up now. Williams continued his orientation, covering everything from the academic requirements to the physical fitness standards. The academic portion would cover criminal law, constitutional rights, report writing, and dozens of other topics essential to police work. The physical training would include running, strength exercises, defensive tactics, firearms training, and scenario-based exercises designed to simulate real-world encounters. "Defensive tactics," Williams said, his eyes seeming to linger on the women in the group, "will separate the wannabes from the real deal. In law enforcement, you can't always rely on backup or equipment. Sometimes it's just you and your training standing between an innocent person and serious harm." After the orientation, the recruits were divided into squads of 8 for their first physical assessment. Maya found herself grouped with Johnson, Rodriguez, and Peterson, along with 4 other men who seemed equally skeptical of her presence. The assessment began with a mile-and-a-half run. Maya had been preparing for months, running 5 miles every morning before work, but she knew that distance running was different from the explosive movements required in defensive tactics. She finished the run in the middle of the pack, neither impressive nor embarrassing. Next came push-ups, sit-ups, and a flexibility test. Again, Maya performed adequately but unremarkably. Her small stature actually helped with some exercises, as she had less body weight to move, but her lack of upper body strength compared to her male classmates was obvious. "Not bad for a girl," Johnson said loud enough for others to hear as they moved to the next station. "Maybe she can be the squad mascot." The comment drew chuckles from several recruits, but Maya noticed that not everyone was laughing. A few of her classmates looked uncomfortable with the harassment, though none spoke up in her defense. The final component of the assessment was a basic self-defense demonstration. Instructor Martinez, a compact man with scarred knuckles and the fluid movements of a martial artist, called for volunteers to demonstrate basic holds and escapes. "This isn't about fighting," Martinez explained. This is about control and de-escalation. A good officer uses the minimum force necessary to maintain safety and compliance. Sometimes that means verbal commands, sometimes it means physical restraint, and sometimes it means defending yourself or others. He demonstrated several basic techniques, including wrist controls, arm bars, and simple takedowns. The movements looked deceptively easy when he performed them, but Maya could see the years of training and muscle memory behind each motion. Pair up, Martinez commanded. Practice the wrist control sequence I just showed you. Switch partners every few minutes so you work with different body types and strength levels. Maya found herself initially paired with Wilson, one of the quieter members of her squad. He was professional and respectful as they practiced the techniques, offering helpful tips and accepting her attempts without condescension. They worked through the sequence several times, with Maya playing both the role of officer and subject. "You've got good hand positioning," Wilson observed. "Have you done any martial arts before?" "Some," Maya replied modestly. The truth was more complicated, but she wasn't ready to share her background with her classmates yet. As the exercise continued, partners rotated as instructed. Maya worked with several different recruits, each presenting unique challenges in terms of size and strength. She adapted her technique for each partner, using leverage and positioning rather than trying to overpower anyone. Finally, it was time to partner with Johnson. He approached with a cocky grin and flexed his considerable muscles. "Try not to hurt yourself, little girl," he said as they squared off for the wrist control exercise. Maya took the role of the subject first, allowing Johnson to practice the technique on her. His movements were clumsy and relied too heavily on brute force, but she didn't correct him. When it came time to switch roles, Johnson extended his wrist with obvious reluctance. "Go easy on me," he said sarcastically. "I might break." Maya positioned herself according to the technique Martinez had demonstrated, but as she began to apply pressure, Johnson resisted far more than the exercise required. Instead of allowing the controlled movement that would demonstrate proper technique, he turned it into a contest of strength. "Come on," Johnson taunted, "is that all you got?" Maya adjusted her grip and angle, applying the technique as taught, but Johnson's resistance made it ineffective. Around them, other pairs were successfully completing the exercise, but Johnson seemed determined to prove a point about Maya's capabilities. "Having trouble there, Chen," Rodriguez called out from a nearby pair. "Maybe you need to hit the gym a few more years." Maya felt frustration building but forced herself to remain calm. She reset her position and tried the technique again, this time with a slight modification that Martinez had shown during his demonstration. Instead of trying to force Johnson's compliance through the standard movement, she shifted her angle and applied pressure to a different point on his wrist. The result was immediate and dramatic. Johnson's knees buckled as the unexpected leverage sent a shock of pain up his arm, and he found himself dropping to the ground in a controlled but involuntary descent. The technique was exactly as taught, but Maya's execution showed an understanding of pressure points and joint manipulation that went beyond the basic instruction. "What the hell?" Johnson gasped as Maya immediately released the hold, extending her hand to help him up. "Sorry," Maya said quietly, "I thought you were ready for the full technique." Johnson stared at her suspiciously as he got to his feet, rubbing his wrist. Around them, several other recruits had stopped their own practice to watch what was happening. Martinez appeared at Maya's shoulder, having observed the entire exchange. "Good adaptation, Chen," the instructor said simply. "You recognized when the standard application wasn't working and adjusted accordingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking we want to see." Johnson's face reddened, whether from embarrassment or anger Maya couldn't tell. "She caught me off guard," he muttered. "In real situations, subjects don't usually cooperate with your techniques," Martinez replied. "They resist, they fight back, they try to hurt you. Being able to adapt under pressure is essential." As the training session concluded and the recruits headed to the locker rooms, Maya could feel the shift in how some of her classmates looked at her. The demonstration with Johnson had been subtle enough that most hadn't fully grasped what had happened, but a few of the more observant recruits seemed to be reevaluating their initial assessments. In the women's locker room, Sarah Kim, one of the other female recruits, approached Maya as they changed out of their training gear. "That was smoothly done," Sarah said quietly. "Johnson's been looking for an excuse to embarrass one of us since day one. Where did you learn to do that?" Maya considered her answer carefully. She had spent years studying various martial arts, starting with traditional karate in high school and expanding into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Krav Maga, and Filipino martial arts during college. Her security job had provided practical experience in de-escalation and restraint techniques, and she had trained with several off-duty police officers who had become her mentors. but she wasn't sure how much of that background she wanted to reveal. I took some self-defense classes in college, she said, which was technically true if incomplete. Sarah nodded. Well, whatever you learned, it worked. Just be careful. Guys like Johnson don't like being shown up, especially by someone they think they can push around. As Maya drove home that evening, she reflected on her first day at the academy. The academic portions had been challenging but manageable, covering topics she had studied extensively during her criminal justice degree. The physical training had been demanding but not beyond her capabilities. The real challenge, she realized, would be navigating the social dynamics and proving herself worthy of respect without creating unnecessary enemies. She thought about her father, who had immigrated to the United States with nothing but a determination to provide better opportunities for his children. He had worked double shifts in a factory for 20 years to pay for Maya's education, never complaining about the sacrifices required. Her decision to pursue law enforcement had worried him initially, but he had come to understand that her desire to protect others came from the same place as his desire to protect his family. Maya pulled into the driveway of the small apartment she shared with her younger brother, who was finishing his engineering degree at the local university. As she walked to the door, she made a silent promise to herself. She would graduate from the academy, she would become the police officer she had always dreamed of being, and she would do it on her own terms. The next morning would bring new challenges, and she suspected that Johnson and his friends would not forget their brief encounter in defensive tactics class. But Maya had faced skeptics and bullies before, and she had learned that sometimes the best response to doubt was simply to keep moving forward with quiet confidence and unshakable determination. As she prepared for bed that night, Maya reviewed the techniques they had learned, visualizing the movements and considering how they might be modified for different situations. Tomorrow would be another step on her journey, and she intended to be ready for whatever came next. 3 weeks into academy training, Maya had established a routine that balanced the intense physical and academic demands of the program. She arrived early each morning to review notes from the previous day's lectures and stayed late to practice techniques in the gym. Her academic performance was strong, consistently scoring in the top 10% on written exams covering criminal law, constitutional rights, and police procedures. The physical training remained challenging but manageable. Maya had improved her run times and increased her upper body strength through dedicated weight training. However, the defensive tactics classes continued to be a source of tension, particularly with Johnson and his growing circle of followers. Instructor Martinez had introduced increasingly complex scenarios during defensive tactics training. The recruits practiced handcuffing techniques, learned to control subjects who were under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and studied methods for safely restraining individuals experiencing mental health crises. Each session built upon previous lessons, requiring recruits to combine multiple techniques into fluid responses. Maya excelled at these exercises, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of leverage, timing, and body mechanics that impressed the instructors. Her small stature, initially seen as a disadvantage, actually helped her develop efficient techniques that relied on precision rather than strength. She learned to redirect an opponent's energy rather than meeting force with force. This success, however, only intensified the resentment from certain classmates. Johnson had convinced several other recruits that Maya was receiving special treatment from the instructors or that her techniques somehow violated the spirit of fair training. His complaints grew louder and more pointed with each passing day. "She's not using real police techniques," Johnson argued during a break between training sessions. "She's showing off with some kung fu movie stuff that would never work in the real world." Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "Right. What happens when she faces a real criminal who doesn't care about her fancy joint locks? She's going to get hurt and probably get her partner hurt too." Peterson, who had become Johnson's most loyal supporter, added his own perspective. "The instructors are going easy on her because they're afraid of being accused of discrimination. But that's not doing her any favors when she gets out there on the street." These conversations often took place within earshot of Maya and the other female recruits, clearly intended to undermine their confidence and create doubt about their capabilities. The harassment was subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation with the instructors, but persistent enough to create a hostile environment. Maya's response was to focus even harder on her training. She studied police manual techniques during her free time, ensuring that every movement she demonstrated could be traced back to approved departmental procedures. She volunteered for extra scenario training and sought feedback from instructors to continuously improve her performance. Instructor Williams had noticed the growing tension within the recruit class, but had not yet chosen to address it directly. He believed that learning to handle interpersonal conflict was part of law enforcement training. and he preferred to let recruits work through their differences unless the situation became genuinely disruptive. The breaking point came during a particularly challenging defensive tactics session in the fourth week of training. Martinez had set up a scenario where recruits would face multiple subjects in various states of agitation and compliance. Each recruit would enter a simulated bar environment where they had to assess threats, de-escalate tensions, and apply appropriate force only when necessary. Real police work isn't about fighting, Martinez explained as the recruits gathered around the training area. It's about reading situations, communicating effectively, and using your training to maintain control with minimal force. The best officers are the ones who can resolve conflicts without anyone getting hurt. The scenario involved 3 role-playing instructors acting as intoxicated bar patrons involved in an escalating argument. The recruit playing the responding officer had to enter the situation, assess the threat level, and take appropriate action to restore order. Some scenarios would require only verbal de-escalation, while others might escalate to the point where physical restraint became necessary. Johnson was among the first to attempt the scenario. He entered the scene with an aggressive posture that immediately elevated the tension. Instead of trying to de-escalate through communication, he quickly resorted to physical force, attempting to handcuff one of the subjects while ignoring the others. The scenario quickly devolved into chaos, with Johnson struggling to control multiple combative subjects while other recruits playing bystanders fled in panic. "Stop," Martinez called, ending the scenario. What went wrong? Johnson was breathing heavily and clearly frustrated. They were all resisting arrest. I had to use force to maintain control. "Did you try verbal de-escalation first?" Martinez asked. "They were drunk and aggressive," Johnson replied. "Talking wasn't going to work." Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "In some situations, immediate physical action is necessary, but you made assumptions about the subject's intentions without fully assessing the situation. You also failed to position yourself safely or call for backup when facing multiple potential threats." Several other recruits attempted the scenario with varying degrees of success. Some relied too heavily on verbal commands without being prepared for physical resistance. Others, like Johnson, moved too quickly to physical force without exploring other options. When Maya's turn came, she approached the scenario with careful observation. She positioned herself near the exit, maintaining a clear escape route while keeping all 3 subjects in view. Her initial verbal commands were calm but authoritative, designed to gather information about the situation rather than immediately taking control. "Good evening, everyone," Maya said as she entered the simulated bar. "I'm Officer Chen. I understand there's been some kind of disagreement here. Can someone tell me what's going on?" One of the role-playing instructors, acting as an intoxicated but cooperative subject, began explaining that the argument had started over a spilled drink. Meanwhile, Maya kept watch on the other 2 subjects, noting their positioning and level of agitation. As the scenario continued, one of the subjects became increasingly aggressive, moving toward Maya in a threatening manner. Instead of immediately resorting to force, she used positioning and verbal commands to maintain distance while continuing to de-escalate. "Sir, I need you to stop right there and keep your hands where I can see them," Maya said firmly. "We're going to work this out, but I need everyone to stay calm." The aggressive subject, following his scripted role, continued to advance. At this point, Maya recognized that physical intervention was necessary. Her response was swift and decisive, but calibrated to the specific threat level. Using a technique that combined standard police defensive tactics with principles from her martial arts background, Maya redirected the subject's forward momentum and applied a controlled armbar that brought him safely to the ground. The movement was so smooth and efficient that the other subjects in the scenario actually de-escalated, impressed by the professional handling of their aggressive companion. "Hands behind your back," Maya instructed as she applied handcuffs. Throughout the entire sequence, she maintained awareness of the other subjects and continued to communicate with them to prevent the situation from escalating further. The scenario concluded with all subjects under control and no injuries to anyone involved. Maya had successfully managed multiple potential threats while using minimal force and maintaining her own safety. "Excellent work, Chen," Martinez said as the scenario ended. "You gathered intelligence before acting, maintained situational awareness throughout, and applied force only when necessary. You also kept the other subjects calm by demonstrating professional competence." The praise from Martinez was well-deserved, but Maya could see it was not well received by Johnson and his supporters. As the training session concluded and recruits headed to the locker rooms, she overheard increasingly hostile whispers about her performance. "Show off," Peterson muttered. "She's making the rest of us look bad with her fancy moves." I'm telling you she's not using regulation techniques, Johnson added. Someone needs to put her in her place before she gets someone hurt. Sarah Kim, who had been partnering with Maya for various exercises, pulled her aside as they changed clothes. You need to be careful, Sarah warned. Johnson's been talking to some of the other guys about challenging you to a more serious sparring match. He's claiming it would help you understand what real police work is like. Maya sighed. She had hoped that consistently strong performance would eventually earn her classmates' respect, but it seemed to be having the opposite effect. The better she performed, the more threatened certain recruits felt. What do you think I should do? Maya asked. Sarah considered the question. You could back down, keep your head low, and try not to stand out. But that means giving up on being the best officer you can be, or you could continue doing what you're doing and deal with the consequences. That evening, Maya called her former martial arts instructor, Master Liu, who had become a mentor and father figure during her college years. She explained the situation at the academy without mentioning specific names or details that might compromise her position. Facing hostility from those who feel threatened by your success is not uncommon, Master Liu said in his measured way. The question is whether you will allow their insecurity to diminish your own growth. I don't want to make enemies, Maya replied, but I also can't pretend to be less capable than I am. True strength, Master Liu observed, often requires us to remain true to ourselves even when others wish us to be different. Your skills were developed through years of dedication and hard work. Using them to protect others is honorable, regardless of what jealous people might say. After the conversation, Maya spent the evening reviewing the techniques she had learned in defensive tactics class, ensuring that every movement could be justified according to standard police procedures. She practiced scenarios in her mind, considering how to handle increasingly hostile challenges from her classmates while maintaining her professional standards. The next day brought news that would test her resolve even further. Instructor Williams announced that the following week would feature intensive sparring exercises where recruits would face realistic resistance from training partners. Unlike the controlled scenarios they had been practicing, these exercises would involve full-contact defensive tactics with protective gear. This is where we separate theory from practice, Williams explained. You'll face opponents who are actively trying to resist your techniques. Some of you will discover that moves that worked in controlled practice don't hold up under real pressure. Others will find that their training serves them well when facing genuine resistance. Maya felt a mix of anticipation and concern. She was confident in her abilities, but she knew that Johnson and his allies would use these sparring sessions as an opportunity to escalate their harassment. The protective gear would allow for more aggressive techniques, and the competitive nature of sparring would provide cover for those who wanted to prove their point through force. As she prepared for the challenges ahead, Maya reminded herself of the reasons she had chosen this career path. She wanted to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them. Her father had taught her that worthwhile goals always required sacrifice and perseverance. The academy training was just the beginning. If she could navigate these interpersonal challenges while maintaining her standards and principles, she would be better prepared for the complexities of actual police work. Every challenge was an opportunity to prove not just her physical capabilities, but her character and judgment under pressure. Maya spent the weekend preparing both physically and mentally for the upcoming sparring exercises. She knew that her performance in these sessions would either earn her the respect she deserved or escalate the conflict with her hostile classmates. Either way, she was determined to meet the challenge with the same dedication and professionalism that had brought her this far. The sparring week arrived with unusual tension in the academy training facility. Word had spread among the recruits that this would be their most challenging defensive tactics assessment yet. Unlike previous controlled exercises, these sessions would involve full resistance from training partners wearing protective gear, simulating the unpredictable nature of real confrontations officers might face in the field. Maya arrived early that Monday morning, as had become her habit, to find several recruits already in the gym discussing strategy for the upcoming exercises. Johnson stood at the center of a small group, speaking in animated tones about techniques and matchups. The key is not to hold back, Johnson was saying. These exercises are supposed to prepare us for real situations where criminals won't be polite about it. If someone can't handle full contact training, they have no business carrying a badge. Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. This is where we find out who's really cut out for police work and who's just here to play games. Maya changed into her training gear and began her warm-up routine, stretching and practicing basic movements to prepare her body for the intense physical activity ahead. She noticed that several recruits seemed nervous about the prospect of full-contact sparring, while others appeared overly excited about the opportunity to test their strength against their classmates. Instructor Martinez entered the training area carrying equipment bags and clipboards containing the day's exercise roster. Behind him followed Instructor Williams and two additional training staff members who would supervise the sparring sessions and ensure safety protocols were followed. "Listen up," Martinez called, bringing the group to attention. "Today marks a significant step in your defensive tactics training. You'll be engaging in controlled sparring exercises designed to test your ability to apply techniques under realistic resistance." He gestured toward the protective gear laid out on tables around the training area. "You'll wear headgear, chest protectors, and padded gloves. The goal is not to hurt your partner, but to apply techniques with enough force to demonstrate effectiveness. Instructors will stop any exercise immediately if safety becomes a concern." Williams stepped forward to add his perspective. "Remember that these exercises serve multiple purposes. You're learning to function under stress, to adapt when your first technique doesn't work, and to maintain control of yourself even when facing aggressive resistance. The recruits who succeed here are the ones who stay calm and think strategically." The first round of exercises paired recruits randomly, ensuring that different size and strength combinations would test everyone's adaptability. Maya found herself initially matched with Wilson, the quiet recruit who had been respectful during their previous training sessions. Both recruits donned their protective gear and approached the center of the training mat. Martinez explained the exercise. One person would attempt to apply a rear wrist control and handcuffing technique, while the other provided realistic but controlled resistance. Maya took the role of the officer first, positioning herself behind Wilson as he played the part of a non-compliant subject. When the exercise began, Wilson provided steady resistance without being overly aggressive, allowing Maya to work through the technique while facing realistic difficulty. Her execution was smooth and efficient. When Wilson resisted her initial grip, Maya adjusted her positioning and applied pressure to different control points until she achieved compliance. The handcuffing procedure followed without incident, and Martinez nodded approvingly. "Good adaptation, Chen. You didn't fight against the resistance, you worked with it to find an effective angle." When they switched roles, Wilson attempted the same technique on Maya. She provided appropriate resistance, helping him practice dealing with a subject who wouldn't simply submit to control. Wilson's technique was adequate but relied heavily on strength, and he struggled when Maya's smaller size and flexibility allowed her to slip some of his holds. "Remember to control the center line," Martinez advised Wilson. "Don't just grab and pull, position your body to limit the subject's movement options." As the morning progressed, Maya rotated through several different partners, each presenting unique challenges in terms of size, strength, and technique. She performed consistently well in both offensive and defensive roles, earning praise from the instructors for her technical proficiency and controlled aggression. The tension in the room increased noticeably when the afternoon rotation paired Maya with Peterson, one of Johnson's closest allies. Peterson was several inches taller and probably 50 pounds heavier than Maya, with the build of someone who had played football in college. Peterson's attitude was immediately different from Maya's previous partners. Instead of the professional courtesy that had characterized her other sparring sessions, he approached the exercise with obvious hostility masked as enthusiasm. "Let's see what you've really got, Chen," Peterson said as they put on their protective gear. "No more playing around with the nice guys." The exercise called for Peterson to attempt an escape from a wrist control while Maya applied the restraining technique. From the beginning, Peterson's resistance was far more aggressive than necessary for effective training. Instead of providing controlled opposition to help Maya practice her technique, he used his size and strength to try to overpower her completely. Maya adapted to the increased resistance by modifying her technique, using footwork and leverage to maintain control despite Peterson's size advantage. When he attempted to spin out of her grip, she redirected his momentum and applied pressure to nerve points that forced compliance without causing injury. "Stop trying to dance around," Peterson growled as Maya successfully completed the handcuffing sequence. "This isn't ballet class." When they switched roles and Peterson took the officer position, his approach became even more problematic. Instead of applying the taught technique, he used his size to force Maya into submission through brute strength. His movements were sloppy and relied entirely on overpowering rather than proper technique. Maya provided appropriate resistance, but found herself dealing with far more force than the exercise required. Peterson's grip was unnecessarily tight, and his movements were aggressive enough to border on actual assault rather than training. Control your intensity, Peterson, Martinez called out as he observed the exercise. This is about technique, not a strength contest. Peterson eased off slightly, but continued to use more force than necessary. When Maya provided resistance by shifting her weight and moving her arms, he responded by tightening his grip to the point where she could feel pressure building in her wrists and shoulders. The exercise concluded without incident, but Maya could tell that Peterson was frustrated by her ability to maintain some level of resistance despite his size advantage. As they removed their protective gear, he made comments about how real criminals would not be so easy to control. Word of the increasingly aggressive sparring sessions spread quickly through the recruit class. By the time the final rotation of the day was announced, tension had reached a palpable level. Maya was not surprised when her name was called alongside Johnson's for the last exercise of the session. Johnson approached the sparring area with a confident swagger that drew attention from other recruits. Several training sessions had been completed by this point, and a crowd of classmates gathered around the mat to watch what many expected to be a decisive confrontation. Finally, Johnson said loud enough for everyone to hear. Time to see if all those fancy moves work against someone who won't just stand there and let you practice. Maya said nothing as she put on her protective gear, focusing on her breathing and mentally reviewing the techniques she might need to employ. She was acutely aware that this exercise would be watched and analyzed by her classmates, and that Johnson would likely view it as an opportunity to prove his point about her capabilities. Martinez approached them both before the exercise began. Same rules as all the other sessions, he emphasized, looking directly at Johnson. Controlled resistance, focus on technique, and stop immediately when I call halt. The exercise was a scenario where the officer had to control and handcuff a subject who was initially compliant but became resistant during the arrest process. Johnson would play the subject first, while Maya attempted to complete the arrest procedure. The exercise began normally, with Johnson playing a compliant subject as Maya approached and began the handcuffing process. However, as soon as she applied the first restraint, Johnson began resisting with far more force and aggression than any of the previous exercises had required. Unlike Peterson's brute force approach, Johnson's resistance was more sophisticated. He used his size and training to create genuine difficulties for Maya, forcing her to adapt her techniques under realistic pressure. His movements were controlled enough to avoid immediate instructor intervention, but aggressive enough to test Maya's skills to their limits. Maya recognized immediately that this was not a standard training exercise. Johnson was using the sparring session as an opportunity to challenge her directly, hoping to demonstrate that her previous successes had been the result of cooperative partners rather than genuine skill. Her response was to treat the situation exactly as she would a real arrest of a non-compliant subject. She maintained her professionalism while adapting her techniques to deal with Johnson's size and resistance. When his movements blocked her standard approaches, she shifted to alternative control methods that utilized leverage and pressure points. The exercise quickly became a genuine test of skill versus strength. Johnson used every advantage his size provided, attempting to break Maya's control through powerful movements and strategic positioning. Maya countered by staying mobile, using Johnson's momentum against him, and applying techniques with surgical precision. The turning point came when Johnson made a mistake. Confident in his strength advantage, he committed fully to a movement designed to break Maya's grip on his wrist. Instead of fighting against his motion, Maya redirected it, using his own force to off-balance him while simultaneously applying a control technique that left him in a compromised position. The movement was so smooth and natural that many observers didn't immediately understand what had happened. One moment Johnson was using his strength to resist Maya's control, and the next, he was on the ground with Maya maintaining perfect positioning for the handcuffing procedure. Halt, Martinez called, ending the exercise. Johnson got to his feet slowly, his face showing a mixture of surprise and frustration. Around the training area, recruits who had been expecting Maya's humiliation instead found themselves witnessing a demonstration of technical proficiency that left little room for doubt about her capabilities. Excellent work, Chen, Martinez said. You maintained control of the situation even when facing significant resistance, and you adapted your techniques to the subject's behavior without escalating the force unnecessarily. The instructor turned to address Johnson. Your resistance was realistic, but you need to remember that this is training. The goal is to help your partner practice techniques, not to prove how strong you are. As the sparring session concluded and recruits headed to the locker rooms, the atmosphere was notably different from the morning's tension. Maya had not only survived Johnson's challenge, but had demonstrated skills that clearly exceeded her classmates' expectations. However, she knew that her troubles were far from over. The humiliation Johnson had experienced in front of his peers would not be easily forgotten, and she suspected that future challenges would be even more intense. The sparring exercises had proven her capabilities, but they had also escalated the conflict with those who wanted her to fail. That evening, as Maya reviewed the day's events, she realized that she had reached a turning point in her academy experience. The respectful skepticism she had faced initially had evolved into open hostility from some classmates, but also growing support from others who had witnessed her professionalism and skill under pressure. The path ahead remained challenging, but Maya felt more confident in her ability to navigate whatever obstacles lay ahead. She had proven to herself and to others that her training and dedication could overcome even deliberate attempts to undermine her success. The week following the sparring exercises brought a noticeable shift in the academy's social dynamics. Maya found herself at the center of quiet conversations that stopped when she approached, knowing glances that followed her through hallways, and an increasingly polarized atmosphere among her fellow recruits. Some classmates had gained new respect for her abilities after witnessing her performance against Johnson. Wilson began seeking her advice on defensive tactics techniques, and several other recruits started training with her during optional evening sessions. Sarah Kim reported that positive conversations about Maya's skills were happening in both the men's and women's locker rooms. However, Johnson and his core supporters had not accepted their public demonstration of Maya's capabilities with grace. Instead of acknowledging her skills, they had doubled down on their criticism, claiming that her techniques were somehow unfair or inappropriate for police work. "She's using moves that aren't in the manual," Peterson argued during a lunch break conversation that Maya overheard from a nearby table. "What happens when she tries that stuff on the street and gets sued for excessive force?" Rodriguez added his own concerns. "She made Johnson look bad on purpose. A good cop doesn't show up their partner like that. It shows she's not a team player." These arguments gained traction with some recruits who were uncomfortable with any suggestion that traditional approaches might not always be the most effective. The idea that a small woman could outperform larger male classmates challenged assumptions about physical requirements for police work that some found threatening. Instructor Williams had observed the growing tension within the recruit class, but had chosen to address it indirectly rather than through direct confrontation. During morning formation on Thursday, he announced a special training exercise that would test teamwork and individual capabilities under realistic stress conditions. "Next week, you'll participate in a comprehensive scenario exercise," Williams explained. "You'll work in teams to respond to multiple simultaneous incidents requiring different skill sets. Each recruit will be evaluated individually, but your team's overall performance will also be assessed." The exercise would simulate a busy evening shift where officers had to respond to domestic disturbances, traffic violations, suspicious activities, and potential criminal behavior. Teams would be randomly assigned, and each member would take turns as the primary officer for different scenarios while their partners provided backup and support. Maya recognized this as an opportunity to demonstrate her abilities in a more realistic context than the isolated sparring sessions. Police work was fundamentally about teamwork and communication, not individual combat prowess. If she could excel in scenarios that required cooperation and professional judgment, it might shift the focus away from the personal conflicts that had dominated recent weeks. The weekend provided a brief respite from academy tensions, but Maya used the time to prepare intensively for the upcoming scenarios. She reviewed legal standards for various types of police encounters, practiced radio communication protocols, and studied departmental policies regarding force escalation and de-escalation techniques. On Monday morning, Williams announced the team assignments for the scenario exercises. Maya found herself grouped with Wilson, Rodriguez, and Thompson, a quiet recruit who had generally avoided taking sides in the ongoing conflicts. The composition presented both opportunities and challenges. Wilson had become genuinely supportive of Maya's training and would likely work well with her during the exercises. Thompson seemed professional and competent, someone who would focus on completing the mission rather than personal agendas. Rodriguez, however, remained aligned with Johnson's faction and might use the team setting to create difficulties for Maya. The first scenario involved responding to a domestic disturbance call where neighbors reported shouting and possible violence from an apartment. Maya was assigned as the primary officer, with Wilson as her backup and Rodriguez and Thompson playing supporting roles as additional units. The exercise took place in a realistic training environment designed to simulate apartment buildings. complete with narrow hallways, multiple doors, and civilian actors playing residents. Maya's team had to approach the scene, gather information, assess the situation, and take appropriate action while maintaining safety for everyone involved. As the primary officer, Maya began by interviewing the reporting party, a neighbor actor who provided details about the disturbance. She gathered information systematically, asking questions about the duration of the incident, the number of people involved, and any history of problems at the location. "We've heard shouting for about 20 minutes, the neighbor reported. "It sounds like a man and woman arguing, and there was a loud crash a few minutes ago. I'm worried someone might be getting hurt." Maya thanked the neighbor for the information and deployed her team strategically. She positioned Wilson at the building's rear exit to prevent anyone from leaving unobserved, while Rodriguez and Thompson covered the front approach and maintained radio contact with dispatch. Approaching the apartment door, Maya could hear raised voices inside, confirming the neighbor's report. She knocked firmly and identified herself as a police officer, using a calm but authoritative tone designed to de-escalate rather than inflame the situation. "Police department, we received a call about a disturbance. I need to speak with everyone inside the apartment." The voices inside stopped immediately, followed by whispered conversation that Maya couldn't make out clearly. After a moment, a male voice responded from behind the door. "Everything's fine, officer, just having a discussion with my girlfriend. No problems here." Maya continued the conversation while signaling to her backup to maintain their positions. Her questions were designed to assess the safety of everyone inside while gathering information about the situation. "Sir, I appreciate that, but we still need to verify that everyone is okay. Can you open the door so we can talk face to face?" The scenario continued with the subjects inside becoming increasingly resistant to police contact, suggesting that something more serious than a simple argument might be occurring. Maya had to make decisions about when to request additional resources, whether to force entry, and how to handle potential evidence of criminal activity. Her performance throughout the scenario was exemplary. She maintained professional communication, made appropriate tactical decisions, and successfully resolved the situation with minimal disruption while ensuring everyone's safety. The instructors observing the exercise took notes on her decision-making process and team coordination. When the exercise concluded, Instructor Martinez provided feedback to the entire team. "Chen demonstrated excellent leadership as the primary officer," he noted. "She gathered intelligence systematically, deployed resources effectively, and maintained communication with all team members throughout the incident." Rodriguez had performed adequately but had shown reluctance to follow Maya's directions promptly, a detail that did not go unnoticed by the supervising instructors. Wilson and Thompson had both performed well in their supporting roles, demonstrating the kind of teamwork that would be essential in real police operations. The second scenario rotated leadership to Wilson, with Maya taking the backup role. The call involved a traffic stop where the vehicle matched the description of one used in a recent robbery. Maya's role was to provide cover while Wilson conducted the stop, and to be prepared for the possibility that the subjects might be armed and dangerous. Wilson's performance was competent but nervous, and Maya found herself providing subtle guidance and support throughout the exercise. When the situation escalated and the subjects became combative, Maya's intervention was swift and decisive, helping Wilson maintain control while ensuring everyone's safety. The third scenario put Rodriguez in the primary role, responding to a call about suspicious activity in a parking garage. Maya and the rest of the team provided backup support, but Rodriguez's leadership style quickly created problems. Instead of gathering information and assessing the situation carefully, Rodriguez approached with an aggressive posture that immediately elevated tensions. When Maya attempted to suggest alternative approaches through subtle communication, Rodriguez dismissed her input and continued with his confrontational style. The scenario spiraled out of control as Rodriguez's aggression triggered defensive responses from the subject actors, eventually requiring instructor intervention to prevent the situation from becoming completely unrealistic. In the debriefing afterward, Martinez was notably critical of Rodriguez's performance. "You escalated a non-violent situation into a potential use of force incident through poor communication and tactical decision-making," Martinez observed. "Police work requires de-escalation skills, not just the ability to assert authority." The final scenario of the day placed Thompson in the primary role, responding to a shoplifting complaint that might involve juvenile subjects. Maya's team worked smoothly together, with Rodriguez notably more cooperative when he wasn't in a leadership position. Thompson's calm, methodical approach proved effective for dealing with the young subjects and store personnel involved in the scenario. Maya provided valuable support by communicating with the juvenile subjects in a way that encouraged cooperation rather than resistance. As the day's exercises concluded, the instructors gathered all teams for a comprehensive debriefing session. Williams addressed the entire group about the importance of teamwork and professional conduct during challenging situations. Real police work requires you to function as part of a team, regardless of personal differences or individual preferences, Williams emphasized. The recruits who succeed in this profession are the ones who can work effectively with anyone, supporting their partners even when they might prefer different approaches. His words were clearly directed at the interpersonal tensions that had been affecting some teams' performance, though he didn't mention specific individuals or incidents. Maya left the academy that evening feeling cautiously optimistic about her progress. The scenario exercises had provided opportunities to demonstrate her skills in realistic contexts, and her teammates had generally responded positively to her leadership and support. Even Rodriguez had shown signs of grudging respect for her professional competence. However, she knew that Johnson and his most devoted followers would not be easily swayed by her performance in team exercises. Their opposition seemed based on deeper concerns about challenging traditional assumptions rather than legitimate questions about her capabilities. As she drove home, Maya reflected on the progress she had made since beginning academy training. The initial skepticism from classmates had evolved into a more complex dynamic where her growing reputation for competence existed alongside persistent hostility from a vocal minority. The scenario exercises had proven that her skills translated effectively to realistic police situations, but they had also highlighted the ongoing challenge of working within a culture that was not entirely welcoming to change. Maya realized that her success at the academy was just the beginning of a longer journey to establish herself as a respected law enforcement professional. The next week would bring new scenarios and continued opportunities to prove herself. But Maya felt increasingly confident that her dedication and training would eventually overcome the obstacles created by those who preferred to judge her based on their assumptions rather than her demonstrated abilities. The final month of academy training arrived with anticipation and anxiety among the recruits. 28 of the original 32 remained, with 4 having dropped out or been dismissed for academic or performance issues. Maya had consistently ranked in the top 5% academically and had earned recognition from instructors for her practical skills, but she knew the most challenging tests still lay ahead. The capstone exercises would simulate real-world scenarios with unprecedented complexity and stress. Recruits would face situations requiring split-second decisions about force escalation, constitutional rights, officer safety, and public protection. These final evaluations would largely determine academy rankings and subsequent assignment preferences. Johnson's hostility toward Maya had evolved into something more strategic and calculated. Rather than continuing direct confrontations that had consistently backfired, he had begun spreading rumors about her background and training methods among recruits and even some instructors. "I heard she's been taking private lessons with some martial arts instructor," Johnson told a group during a study break. "That's probably why her techniques look different from what we're being taught here. Makes you wonder what else she's not telling us about her background." Peterson expanded on these suspicions. "Right, and why would someone need all that extra training unless they were planning to go beyond normal police procedures? Seems like she's preparing for something more than standard law enforcement." These whispered campaigns were more insidious than the previous direct challenges because they created doubt about Maya's character and intentions rather than her abilities. Some recruits who had begun to respect her skills started questioning whether she could be trusted to follow proper procedures under pressure. The first capstone exercise was designed to test individual decision-making under extreme stress. Each recruit would enter a complex scenario alone, facing multiple potential threats and legal considerations without backup or guidance. Hidden cameras would record every action and word for detailed analysis by academy instructors and guest evaluators from local law enforcement agencies. Maya's scenario involved responding to a convenience store alarm during night shift hours. As she approached the simulated store, she could see broken glass and signs of forced entry, but no immediate indication of whether suspects were still inside or had fled the scene. Her training took over as she assessed the situation systematically. She radioed for backup while positioning herself to observe the store interior, looking for movement or other signs that might indicate the presence of subjects inside. The scenario was designed to create ambiguity about threat levels and appropriate responses. As Maya approached the store entrance, She heard sounds from inside that could be either looters still in the building or innocent civilians who might have been trapped during the break-in. Her decision-making process had to account for multiple possibilities while maintaining officer safety and protecting any potential victims. Police department, Maya announced loudly as she approached the entrance. If anyone is inside this building, identify yourself immediately. The response came in the form of panic shouting from what sounded like a young voice, followed by the crash of falling merchandise. Maya had to make rapid decisions about whether to enter immediately to provide assistance or wait for backup, while a potential victim might be in danger. Her choice was to enter the building cautiously while maintaining radio contact with dispatch, positioning herself to respond to threats while moving toward the source of the distress calls. The scenario was designed to test whether recruits would prioritize officer safety over civilian assistance or find ways to accomplish both objectives. Inside the store, Maya discovered a teenage actor playing a frightened witness who had been hiding in the storage room when the break-in occurred. However, the scenario included additional complications. Sounds from other parts of the store suggested that suspects might still be present, and the witness was providing confusing information about what had happened. Maya's response demonstrated the integration of everything she had learned during academy training. She secured the witness while maintaining awareness of potential threats, gathered essential information while preserving evidence, and coordinated with responding backup units to systematically clear the building. The scenario concluded with the successful apprehension of suspects who had been hiding in the store's rear office, the safe evacuation of the witness, and the preservation of evidence necessary for prosecution. Maya's performance earned praise from evaluators for her tactical decision-making and professional composure under pressure. However, Johnson's scenario proved even more challenging. He faced a domestic violence call where the situation escalated rapidly from verbal argument to physical confrontation. His response relied heavily on aggressive tactics and overwhelming force, eventually resolving the situation, but with significant property damage and unnecessary trauma for the family involved. The evaluators noted Johnson's willingness to take decisive action, but criticized his failure to de-escalate and his reliance on force when other options might have been more effective. The contrast between his approach and Maya's methodical professionalism became a topic of discussion among instructors. As the final week of training approached, Instructor Williams called Maya into his office for what he described as a routine pre-graduation counseling session. However, the conversation quickly revealed concerns about the ongoing tensions within the recruit class. "Chen, your academic and practical performance has been exemplary throughout the program," Williams began. "Your scores rank among the highest we've seen, and your scenario evaluations consistently demonstrate sound judgment and technical proficiency." Maya felt a moment of relief, but Williams continued with a more serious tone. "However, I'm concerned about reports of interpersonal conflicts that may affect your transition to actual police work. Law enforcement requires the ability to work effectively with colleagues who may have different backgrounds, perspectives, and approaches." Williams was giving her an opportunity to address the situation with Johnson and his supporters, but Maya recognized that any complaints might be perceived as inability to handle workplace conflicts independently. "Sir, I've focused on performing my duties professionally and supporting my classmates when appropriate," Maya replied carefully. "I understand that different people have different approaches to law enforcement, and I'm committed to working effectively with anyone assigned as my partner." Williams nodded thoughtfully. "That's the right attitude, but I want you to understand that some of your techniques, while effective, have drawn attention because they differ from standard academy instruction. Can you explain your background in martial arts?" Maya had been dreading this conversation, but knew it was inevitable. She provided an honest account of her training history, emphasizing the defensive nature of her skills and her commitment to using only appropriate force levels in law enforcement situations. "My training has always emphasized de-escalation and minimum necessary force," she explained. "Everything I've demonstrated during academy exercises falls within departmental policy guidelines, and I've been careful to use techniques that are legally defensible and professionally appropriate." Williams listened carefully before responding. "I'm not questioning your techniques or your commitment to proper procedures, but you should understand that some colleagues and supervisors may be uncomfortable with approaches they don't recognize from standard training. Your challenge will be demonstrating that your skills enhance rather than complicate effective police work." The conversation ended with Williams expressing confidence in Maya's potential, while warning her to be prepared for continued skepticism as she began her career. His advice was both supportive and realistic about the challenges she would face. The final capstone exercise took place on the last Thursday of academy training. All remaining recruits participated in a complex multi-scenario event that simulated an entire shift of police work. Teams responded to simultaneous calls, handled multiple priorities, and faced situations where backup might not be immediately available. Maya found herself partnered with Thompson for the exercise, a pairing that allowed both recruits to demonstrate their strengths without the personality conflicts that had characterized some previous partnerships. Their assigned calls included a traffic accident with possible injuries, a suspicious person report that might involve mental health issues, and a burglary in progress at a residential location. The traffic accident scenario required careful coordination between emergency services, investigation of possible impaired driving, and management of traffic flow around the accident scene. Maya's systematic approach to evidence gathering and Thompson's calm interaction with distraught drivers proved to be an effective combination. The suspicious person call involved an elderly man with dementia who had become confused and was wandering in a commercial area. Maya's patient communication style and understanding of mental health issues helped resolve the situation safely, reconnecting the man with his family while ensuring his well-being. The burglary call escalated into the most challenging scenario when the suspects were discovered still inside the residence. Maya and Thompson had to coordinate their approach, secure the scene, and apprehend two subjects while ensuring that no family members were being held inside the house. Their teamwork during this scenario was exceptional. Thompson handled perimeter security while Maya conducted negotiations with the subjects, eventually convincing them to surrender peacefully. The arrest was completed without violence, and evidence was preserved for prosecution. As the final exercise concluded, all recruits gathered for the last formation of their academy training. Instructor Williams addressed the group with reflections on their journey and expectations for their careers ahead. 28 of you will graduate tomorrow and begin your careers in law enforcement, Williams said. You've learned essential skills and knowledge, but your real education begins when you start working with experienced officers on actual calls. He paused to look across the formation, his gaze including every recruit. The communities you serve will judge you not by your academy scores or physical abilities, but by your character, judgment, and commitment to protecting others. Some of you will face situations that test everything you've learned here. Others will find that your biggest challenges involve working with colleagues who have different approaches to the job. Maya understood that his words applied directly to her situation, but they also reflected broader truths about law enforcement careers that all recruits would need to navigate. At the graduation ceremony the following day, Maya received recognition for academic excellence and outstanding performance in practical exercises. Her parents attended the ceremony, beaming with pride as she received her certificate and badge. Johnson graduated as well, though his final rankings were considerably lower than Maya's. During the reception following the ceremony, he approached her with what appeared to be an attempt at reconciliation. "Look, Chen," Johnson said, extending his hand. "We had our differences during training, but we're all cops now. Maybe we can work together professionally." Maya shook his hand while recognizing that his words were probably motivated more by the presence of department supervisors than genuine change of heart. However, she responded with professional courtesy. "I'm committed to supporting all my fellow officers," she replied. "The community deserves our best efforts regardless of personal differences." As Maya left the academy for the last time, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The challenges with Johnson and his supporters had been difficult and sometimes painful, but they had also prepared her for the realities of working in an environment where not everyone would immediately accept her capabilities. She had proven to herself and to others that dedication, skill, and professional integrity could overcome prejudice and skepticism. Her defensive tactics abilities had been just one component of her success. Equally important were her judgment, communication skills, and commitment to the principles of law enforcement. Maya's first assignment would be to a patrol unit in a busy urban precinct, where she would work under the supervision of experienced officers while continuing to develop her skills. The real test of her academy training would come in the months ahead, as she faced actual criminals, genuine emergencies, and the complex human situations that defined police work. But as she drove away from the academy, Maya felt confident that she was prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had learned not just defensive tactics and legal procedures, but also how to maintain her principles and professionalism even when facing opposition from those who doubted her abilities. The laughter and skepticism that had greeted her arrival at the academy had been replaced by respect earned through consistent excellence and unwavering dedication. Maya Chen was ready to begin her career as a police officer, equipped with the skills, knowledge, and character necessary to protect and serve her community with distinction.